Anonymous, forbidden talks. The inevitable choice we must make. Live with technology or live with nature. Living off-grid or completely under surveillance. The collapse of complex human societies remains poorly understood, and current theories fail to model important features of historical examples of collapse of civilizations. The relationships among various resources such as capital, waste, and production, as well as logistics, transport, trade, politics, and geopolitics, are the basis for an ecological model of collapse in which production fails to meet maintenance requirements for existing capital, especially during the 20 and 21 COVID epidemic, in which the world shut down. Societies facing such crises, which is the whole world right now, after having depleted essential resources, risk catabolic collapse. A self-reinforcing cycle of contraction, converting most capital to waste. This model allows key features of historical examples of collapse to be accounted for, and suggests parallels between successional processes in non-human ecosystems and collapse phenomena in human societies. In the moment, collapse phenomena might be the riots in Europe about the second-class citizen for people who don't want vaccines and the freedom of choice. It might be the riots from the lockdowns in America. It might be the war in Burma and Afghanistan and the COVID epidemic. In order to make this choice, we have to bring about changes because we are currently bound to a certain system of rule and governance and have very little freedom of choice or freedom of expression. And so, what is the only event that has ever brought change in this world? If you look back in history, right up to the present day, all changes for the better and even for the worse have come through one single thing with various peripheral influential aspects involved. But there is one main thing behind it, and that thing is, as you can imagine, war, riots, and civil disobedience, both of which the latter are belonging to the category of two factions who are not in agreement and are in strife with each other. And war is the same. It is two factions who are not in agreement. In part, this comes from the existence of different countries and different cultures, but that is for later discussion. So, simply said, war, both within and without, interior and exterior, within a country's borders of a sovereign country, which I don't think should exist anyway. War is not necessarily, however, an unnatural and artificial phenomena. For example, in the case of chimpanzees in the forest, we can also see this behavior. And it's clear that humans have been fighting for thousands of years, fighting wars and disputes between clans and kingdoms, and we may not be the only ones on this planet who do so. The animal kingdom may also have this phenomenon. and it might be part of evolution and natural selection. So there's growing evidence that several other species also engage in warfare, including our closest relatives, the chimpanzees. That suggests, of course, that we have inherited our predilection for warfare and aggression from our ape-like ancestors. And let us remember that this aggression is usually to do with the stealing of resources when you don't have enough yourself. Yeah? And so we're supposed to have inherited it from our ape-like ancestors, according to scientists. But not everyone agrees that warfare is inbuilt. It is, however, a little bit more complicated than that, in our opinion, because only humans call it warfare. Nature does not call it warfare. Warfare is a conditioned, abstract human concept. And therefore, when a buffalo kills a lion to protect its children, it is not committing a sin, which is also a human concept. But war, as we call it, or the dispute over territory and resources, has been seen to occur in many different species and is therefore most probably a process of natural selection and belongs to a certain algorithm of natural selection called evolution. What is known as coalitionary killing, which means ganging up on one or on another tribe of chimpanzees or ants or termites attack ants, one species attacks another or one species attacks the same, is a natural behavior. The suggestion by scientists that lethal aggression and warfare are innate to chimps is considered controversial and often argued by different individuals, including me. But when we observe the other species that fight over territories and resources, we can see them behaving the same. And this theory therefore falls apart completely because it doesn't just apply to chimpanzees or humans. However, in the case of humans, the peaceful revolution and the liberation of East Germany during the fall of the Berlin Wall, when the East Germans just walked with candles peacefully towards the parliament, and by the time they had arrived, the Russian soldiers and the East German government had already fled to Russia, without bloodshed. And this led to the reunification of Germany and, of course, was achieved without bloodshed. And this is a perfect example of achieving a solution to a strife, or waging war, as humans call it, which is what the chimpanzees and the ants do, if under human terminology, through civil disobedience and public protest, peaceful public protest, large enough to be covered by the mass media. That means to go viral, because that's when governments react the most. Because for single individuals who don't get any attention, mostly individuals get ignored, regardless of what human rights have been abused or of which country they are a citizen of. They cannot rely on their government or their embassy or anybody but the justice of the country they are in, which as a foreigner is usually no justice at all. And the existence of international sovereign nations and the existence of the UN using dialogue instead of war, which is a natural process for change, whereas dialogue has never been a natural process for change, because dialogue, even though after the Second World War They said dialogue was the way forward and that never again should the Holocaust happen. We have seen ISIL, we've seen the World Trade Center bombing, we've seen lots of bin Laden's attacks and Gaddafi's attacks. We've seen ISIL, we've seen the Taliban now twice in 2021. We can see them for the second time. And the Burmese insurrection. And other wars you don't even see on the news. Yeah. And nobody's doing anything about it. Whereas if it was Kuwait, where there's lots of oil, then they would rush in to help. Or if it was Bosnia-Herzegovina, then they would just send in the UN forces to sit there and do nothing and pretend they're doing something to justify their funds, but not help, because there's no oil there. Afghanistan, they will move back in because of the emeralds they have there and for other resources they have, and to gain a strategic military base, but to take over completely. War is something we do not like or approve of, but we have concluded through multidisciplinarian studies that war is a natural process of evolution for the survival of species, and that war is a natural process even when technology seems to take it outside of Mother Nature with technology. War has become obvious that it is war as a natural process of change, and that this is the way that things change in evolution. When radical changes are necessary, war occurs, or strife, or disagreement and fighting, in order to save a race of sentient beings or the ecology of a planet ASAP, to keep the balance which is controlled by nature's algorithm. It might be a war between the same species for territorial rights or for food, or it might be a war between different species. But war exists even in animals. War or revolution, meaning civil war, violent or peaceful, civil disobedience and protest, brings about the end of one system of governance and introduces a new system, which begins with much freedom and slowly develops through human greed and hierarchy, the development of social status, wealth creation, and each civilization expands and grows to the point where it reaches its point of saturation. After this, it cannot expand any further, because it is saturated and it has a limited amount of soldiers, and it has to delegate people to lead each city-state in each province and each country. And that is where the trust starts to be lost. We have seen the expansion and decline of empires from ancient Egypt, Sumeria, the empire of Napoleon Bonaparte, Genghis Khan, and so many, the rise of Rome and Alexander the Great. And where are they all now? They were greater than our civilization today. Alexander the Great's empire is no longer, just like all the empires before it, and those after it, up to the present. This shows, of course, that all empires rise and eventually fall, which leaves us with the question of how long will this civilization take to rise and to fall? And is it falling right now, looking at the present situation? And now we can start to take a look at the large map of the various countries which Alexander the Great conquered, and kingdoms, of course, and eventually reached his maximum expansion rate and could not keep up with his resources and had to delegate rulers for each city kingdom and each district, which left him, of course, out of personal control and having to trust others. And as we know, in Greek politics, in the Senate and the Roman Senate, and even in the times of Alexander the Great, all rulers have enemies who want to take their power. And this is one of the many reasons of the beginning of the decline of his empire, among many, many, many other reasons. But expansion faster than you can create enough soldiers and resources and food to keep them supplied, and the logistics to get them there in time, does cause the decline and the fall of a civilization. We can now take a look at the fall of the Roman Empire, which was due to the Germanic tribes and various other reasons, also expansion. External military threats were a major cause of Rome's fail, but not the only cause, of course, as expansion of their empire and loss of enough soldiers and the distance to transport their resources to their soldiers became ever longer. And this, of course, reached their point of saturation. Yeah. And the effects spread across the empire. And they kept pressure on the Roman Empire. While nations such as Russia became powerful and sophisticated and well weaponized and well organized, with great armies in great numbers. And what had been the barbarian villages in Germany soon became a little bit more settled, through having been invaded by the Romans beforehand, and learned from them how to build villages and learn various artisan crafts and how to make tools. And so they developed. Apart from the fact that one of the sons of the Germanic kings was taken by one of the Roman emperors as his own son and learned all of the military strategic methods, and ended up returning back to the Germanic tribes, who I believe was a Macedonian, and ended up leading the Germanic tribes to victory and the sacking of Rome. Yeah. So what had been the barbarian villages in Germany soon turned into 2,300 walled towns and cities. And this led to a long series of wars. And I mean a long series. It went over at least 2 or 3 emperors on the northern borders of the Roman Empire, bordering on the Germanic territories, which resulted in the sacking of Rome in the end. And, of course, the fall of civilization as we knew it for at least 1,000 years, with the loss of literacy, the loss of roads and water systems and logistics and easy ways to transport goods for trade. And people went back to living in wooden huts in the forest and gathering berries and hunting, and forgot how to read, except for the monks and the priors in the monasteries and in the Vatican. And in those times, even kings could not read. And that's why they used scribes and monks in order to help them read. And so that's what happened after the sacking of Rome and the fall of the Roman Empire, which was subsequently occurring afterwards. War sometimes brings revolutionary changes for the betterment of mankind, such as the Second World War or the First World War, the Holocaust in the Second World War. But sometimes, as in the sacking of Rome by the northern barbarian forces, this was to the deficit of mankind, resulting in the decline of civilization, the loss of literacy, arts, the disappearance of transport and trade routes, and the water sewage systems, and the many advanced sciences of architecture and stonemasonry and other arts they had developed. This ensued in the Dark Ages. The Dark Ages is a term for the early Middle Ages or Middle Ages, medieval times, during the time of the Roman Empire in Europe in its heyday, and after its fall in the 5th century to 6th century, characterizing as marked by economic, intellectual, and cultural decline, meaning the loss of the ability to read, forgetting how to plant things, forgetting how to write, the use of tools and the wheel, such as chariots and animal husbandry, and people went back to building log cabins and living in the woods and eating berries and hunting rabbits and squirrels and stuff. So the concept of a dark age, apart from this, originated in the 1330s with the Italian scholar Petrarch, who regarded the post-Roman centuries as dark compared to the light of classical antiquity. The term employs traditional light versus darkness imagery to contrast the era's darkness, which means lack of records, with earlier and later periods of light, meaning abundance of records and information, data, like the internet today. The phrase Dark Age itself derives from the Latin saeculum obscurum, originally applied by Caesar Baronius in 1602, when he referred to a tumultuous period in the 10th and 11th centuries. The concept of this thus came to characterize the entire Middle Ages as a time of intellectual darkness in Europe, between the fall of Rome and the Renaissance. This became especially popular during the 18th century age of enlightenment, meaning this belief. What it really means is that even though we had the bubonic plague, the Dark Ages, total ignorance, no writing, barter and exchange instead of a monetary system in most villages and small towns, and individuals surviving off their own land instead of mass farming and trade routes. Doesn't mean that people weren't happy. People were probably living their own lives in more freedom than they do today. But they were Dark Ages because we had the persecutions of Torquemada, the witch hunts, and all sorts of atrocities committed by the Vatican and the Catholics, and invasions and wars by the Templars on the Muslim world, and all sorts of atrocities. So they were, for me, anyway, the Dark Ages, of course. The Late Bronze Age collapse was a Dark Age transition in a large area covering much of Southeast Europe, West Asia and North Africa, which comprised the overlapping regions of the Near East, the Eastern Mediterranean and North Africa, with the Balkans, the Aegean, the Anatolia and the Caucasus Mountains. This took place from the Late Bronze Age to the emerging Early Iron Age. It was a transition which historians believed was violent, sudden, and culturally disruptive, and involved in societal collapse, especially for some civilizations during the 12th century BC, and the palace economy of the Mycenaean Greece, the Aegean region, the Anatolia that had characterized the Late Bronze Age disintegrated, transforming into the small, isolated village cultures of the Greek Dark Ages. The Hittite Empire of Anatolia and the Levant both collapsed, while states such as the Middle Assyrian Empire in Mesopotamia and the new kingdom of Egypt survived, but were considerably weakened. Competing and even mutually compatible theories for the ultimate cause of the Late Bronze Age collapse has been made since the 19th century, probably all wrong. These include volcanic eruptions, droughts, invasions by the sea peoples, who are unknown, or migrations of Dorians, economic disruptions due to the rising of its ironworking, and changes in military technology, and of course, methods of war that saw the decline of chariot warfare. I think that's in a study for itself, really, to see the not just one, but all of these and other inconsidered aspects came to the fall of civilization in this particular area of city kingdoms, of various kingdoms and empires. But all of them fell, and that's the point. They all had limited lifespans, as does this one. Even modern mathematicians have begun to calculate using artificial intelligence algorithms and computing, and math, of course, to try to study past civilizations and how they rose and fell, and the frequency they rose and fell with, and try to include all of the different aspects of each age of each civilization and what the influential factors were in the fall. And this is because they're trying to calculate just how much longer our current civilization may have left before its decline, because they have concluded that all civilizations have a beginning, a golden age, and an end. And most of our world leaders in the present day, in 2021, right now as I record, if you think about it, they're all aged between 60 and 75 years old and half senile. And none of them understand the current technologies nor the risks they have to manage. And I don't think they know anything about how to evade the fall of civilization. And they don't know if it's going to be through the collapse of the economy, unforeseen things such as pandemics, disruptive technologies, destructive cyber attacks, and of course wars, as well as trade wars. And the data sets being used and given by consultants are incomplete in order to add to the algorithm for calculating the end of civilization, and it's impossible to successfully attain an accurate prediction. Although I have to say, governments tend to profit from wars due to the influence of the military-industrial war complex machine. And of course the oil moguls who are paying for presidential campaigns, political ads, which should in my opinion be forbidden to advertise for politics. That's propaganda. Where is the best place to fight your war? Starting with yourself. Get active. Get radical. Tune in, turn on, drop out. Whatever you can do, it helps. No matter how big or small, put in your 5 cents worth. Ideas. Always what you never suspected. Just when you never suspected it. You can kill a person, but you can never kill an idea. It will always be reborn in the mind of another.